So I want you to really try to put yourself in Warsaw, Poland. It's the morning of September 19th, 1940.
Right, and the city has been under German occupation for a full year at this point.
Yeah, exactly a year. And on this particular morning, there's just a completely new kind of terror unfolding on the streets.
It's very visceral kind of terror.
I mean, you can hear the harsh, heavy idle of those German military transport trucks just rumbling over the cobblestones. You hear the sharp crack of boots hitting the pavement, shouted orders in German echoing off all the brick buildings.
And what the soldiers are doing is rapidly throwing a cordon around an entire residential district.
Yeah, a hard physical perimeter of armed men. They're conducting what was called a szopanka.
Right, a roundup. That was a local slang for it. The occupiers are essentially just casting this wide, indiscriminate net over the whole city.
Which is terrifying because they aren't looking for specific resistance fighters or criminals, right?
No, not at all. They're simply funneling civilians. Just pulling random people right off the sidewalk.
Dragging them out of cafes.
Exactly. Pulling them off bicycles and throwing them into the backs of these canvas-covered trucks.
And the sheer panic of that moment, I mean, it is total. Imagine the visceral, biological imperative taking over every single person on that street.
It's pure fight or flight, and it's heavily, heavily weighted toward flight.
People are scrambling over brick walls. They're pressing themselves flat into dark doorways, just hoping the shadows hide them. Mothers are grabbing their kids and diving under market stalls.
It's the sound and movement of an entire city flinching at once.
Yeah.
A chaotic, desperate scramble for survival.
Because your brain is screaming a single command, get away. Everyone is desperately trying to get away. Everyone except for one man.
Yeah, this is the part that's just so hard to fathom.
Right. Moving calmly, deliberately, going completely against the tide of the panic, a 39-year-old Polish officer is walking directly into the cordon.
He isn't hiding. He isn't running.
He's actually carrying forged identity papers bearing the name Tomasz Serafisky. And when a soldier finally grabs him and shoves him toward the trucks, he doesn't resist at all.
He isn't being captured because he's too slow or, just unlucky.
No, he has spent days arranging his life to be on this exact street at this exact hour so that he will be taken.
He is effectively reporting for duty. He's using the occupier's own terror tactic as a backdoor.
I can't get past the gravity of this choice. Survival relies on fleeing danger. What kind of lucid, overriding self-control does it take to suppress that fundamental human instinct and walk into a black hole on purpose?
It takes something most of us can't even comprehend.
His real name was Witold Pilecki. And the abyss he was stepping into was a relatively unknown internment camp beside a southern Polish town called Auschwitz. The Germans called it Auschwitz.
And, Pilecki's story requires us to completely reframe how we look at history.
How do you mean?
Well, we're so used to the thriller narrative, right? The spy caper where the hero infiltrates the evil stronghold to blow it up and walk away in slow motion. We need to just leave that trope at the door.
Yeah, this isn't a movie.
Exactly. Pilecki is not an action hero in a movie. He is a lens. He's the human lens through which we are going to view the incomprehensible suffering of millions of people.
So just to outline things for you listening, the mission of our Deep Dive today is to explore the first comprehensive eyewitness report of a death camp the Allies ever obtained.
We're going to look at the actual mechanics of witnessing.
But maybe even heavier than that, we have to unpack the devastating reality of what happens when the free world is handed an unbearable documented truth and completely fails to act on it.
Right. We are examining the tragic friction between a reality that completely defies human belief and an intelligence apparatus that demands hard data.
And just a quick note up front, we're relying strictly on the historical source documents for this deep dive. We're not taking any political sides here. We're just conveying exactly what the primary sources and the historical consensus tell us happened.
Absolutely. And to understand the choice Pilecki made on that September morning, we have to look at who this man was before his country collapsed.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because to walk into a roundup like that, you might picture some young, reckless idealist who thinks he's invincible, right?
That would be the assumption, sure.
But Pilecki was born in 1901. So by 1940, he's 39 years old. He's a Polish cavalry officer. He owned an estate. He was a husband. And he was a father to 2 young children.
He had incredibly deep roots.
Yeah. He had everything to lose.
But he was also a hardened, seasoned military professional. I mean, Pilecki fought in the Polish-Soviet War of 1919 to 1921.
He'd seen real combat.
A lot of it. He commanded cavalry units in the 1939 defense of Poland, when Germany invaded from the west and the Soviet Union invaded from the east.
And when the Polish state was dismantled, he didn't surrender and just, go home to his farm.
No, he immediately went underground in Warsaw and co-founded an early resistance group called the Secret Polish Army.
Which means he really understands strategy. He understands the ruthless math of military occupation.
Precisely. This is a man who evaluates risk for a living. He does not make whimsical, impulsive decisions. Everything he does is highly calculated.
And that calculation is what drove him to look at the massive intelligence blind spot the underground was facing in 1940.
Which was Auschwitz.
Right. And I think this is where we need to kind of strip away our own historical hindsight. Because we hear the word Auschwitz today, and it is universally synonymous with the Holocaust.
It's the ultimate, horrifying symbol of industrial-scale extermination.
But in 1940, the Polish underground knew almost nothing about it. It was just a blank spot on the map.
Yeah, it was a newly established facility, converted from old Polish army barracks.
So to the outside world, what did it look like?
To the outside world, and honestly even to the sophisticated resistance networks in Warsaw, it appeared to be a brutal political prison.
Right.
It was designed initially to break the Polish intelligentsia, so teachers, priests, political leaders, military officers. It had not yet evolved into the sprawling, mechanized extermination center for European Jews that it would later become.
But thousands of Poles were disappearing into it, and absolutely no reliable, actionable intelligence was coming out.
None at all. It's essentially a black box. You see the trains going in, but you have no schematic of the interior.
And if you're the secret Polish army trying to organize a nationwide resistance, you just cannot operate with a black box of that magnitude sitting right in your territory. You need an asset behind the wire.
Exactly. When you have no aerial photography, when you have no intercepted radio chatter that gives you a clear picture of an enemy facility, you are entirely reliant on
Human intelligence.
Right. You need eyes on the ground. You need someone to measure the walls, count the guards, assess the morale of the prisoners, and figure out how to communicate back to headquarters.
But the overwhelming problem here is that the ground is a heavily fortified concentration camp.
Yes. So the leadership of the secret Polish army looks at this impossible problem. And a plan is proposed to infiltrate the camp.
And I want to clarify something here because the mythology sometimes obscures the actual history. You'll often hear people say Pilecki volunteered for Auschwitz, which almost makes it sound like he woke up one morning with a martyr complex and pitched the idea himself.
Right.
But the reality is much more structured than that, isn't it? This was a calculated military assignment proposed to him by his commanding officers.
That is a vital distinction, yeah. It elevates his action from a lone, rogue act of bravery to a deeply strategic military sacrifice.
So they came to him.
His superiors approached him, laid out the intelligence vacuum, and proposed that he use a false identity to get arrested and sent to this new camp.
He asked for a few days to consider it, right, to settle his affairs.
He did, and then he accepted the mission. He weighed the existential need for intelligence against the incredibly high probability of his own death, and he accepted the math.
I'm just trying to wrap my head around this. If I'm Pilecki, how do I even justify to myself that this is survivable?
Well, you justify it because you are operating on an outdated paradigm.
What do you mean?
In 1940, the underground viewed Auschwitz basically as a standard, albeit incredibly harsh, prisoner of war or internment camp. Pilecki had been in combat. He knew what POW camps looked like.
Oh, I see.
In a standard camp, there are certain unspoken rules. There are underground economies. Prisoners figure out how to bribe guards, how to smuggle notes, how to organize.
So he thinks he's walking into a tough prison, not an entirely new paradigm of human destruction. He doesn't know the rules of warfare have fundamentally changed.
He had absolutely no idea he was stepping into a machine designed to annihilate human beings.
Wow.
But that psychological state, what historians call his lucid self-sacrifice, is what allowed him to take those forged papers for Tomasz Serafisky, step out into that September 19 roundup, and deliberately fail to hide.
And the illusion shatters almost immediately, doesn't it?
Almost instantly, yes.
Because he isn't treated like a captured officer, he's treated like livestock. He spends 2 days in a holding area in Warsaw enduring brutal beatings alongside hundreds of terrified civilians before they are packed into cattle cars.
The transport itself was a tool of terror. No food, no water, just suffocating conditions.
And when the train finally stops and the doors are thrown open at Auschwitz, the psychological assault begins instantly.
You have the screaming guards, the dogs, the blinding floodlights, the violent stripping of their clothes, their hair, their personal belongings.
He loses his name. The Polish officer Witold Pilecki ceases to exist. He becomes prisoner 4859.
And that stripping of identity is the crucial first step in the totalitarian dehumanization process.
Break them down immediately.
Right. If you can convince a prisoner that they are merely a number, you have broken their psychological resistance before they even reach the barracks.
But for Pilecki, becoming 4859 actually served a dual purpose, didn't it?
It did. Yes, it was degrading. But it was also the ultimate cover. He had successfully infiltrated the black box.
But getting inside was only step one. Now, prisoner 4859 has to figure out how to stay alive.
And not just barely cling to life.
Right, he has to maintain enough physical and mental acuity to build a functioning military resistance network in a place designed to grind him into dust.
We really have to understand the environment he was operating in to fully grasp the magnitude of what he accomplished. Pilecki encountered an ecosystem defined by three things: engineered starvation, catastrophic physical exhaustion, and casual ambient murder.
The phrase casual murder is so chilling. What does that actually look like on the ground?
It means that violence wasn't just a method of punishment for breaking a rule. Violence was the weather.
God.
A guard might beat a prisoner to death with a shovel simply because he didn't like how the prisoner was standing, or, just out of utter boredom. Life had zero intrinsic value.
Because in a normal prison, the warden wants to keep the inmates alive to serve their sentence.
Exactly. But in Auschwitz, the goal was extermination through labor. The caloric intake was mathematically calculated to result in death within a few months.
So you're starving, you're freezing, you're doing back-breaking physical labor for 12 hours a day, and the guy next to you might get his skull crushed just for stumbling.
Yes.
And amidst this absolute degradation, Pilecki decides it's time to start recruiting.
It defies logic, but he does it. He begins building the ZOW, the secret Polish army network, inside the camp.
Wait, hold on. Stop there. I need to understand the mechanics of this. How do you build an underground army of hundreds of prisoners in a place where informants are literally rewarded with an extra piece of bread?
It's incredibly difficult.
Where whispering the wrong thing to the wrong person gets you a bullet in the back of the neck.
You do it through an incredibly rigid, paranoid system of compartmentalization. Pilecki organized the ZOW into a cell structure.
How did that work?
He started with the upper five, a core group of 5 trusted men. Then those men would recruit their own small cells. But here is the key. The members of one cell had absolutely no idea who was in the other cells.
Ah, so if a guard catches someone and tortures them, they can't give up the whole network.
Exactly. Even under the most agonizing torture, a broken prisoner can only betray the 3 or 4 guys in his immediate circle.
That's brilliant.
The broader network, and Pilecki at the top of it, remained insulated. It was a masterpiece of clandestine engineering. And through this structure, he grew the organization to over 1,000 sworn members.
1,000 members, that's staggering. And what is this network actually doing on a daily basis? Because they aren't stockpiling rifles under the floorboards in the barracks.
No, their first objective was psychological survival. The ZOW organized extra food rations for the weakest members, shared clothing, and tried to get their people assigned to indoor work details during the brutal winters.
Like the carpentry shop, the kitchens, the administrative offices.
Right, and placing ZOW members in administrative roles was crucial because it allowed them to manipulate work assignments and, most importantly, gather intelligence.
So they are essentially mapping the black box from the inside. They're noting the routines of the SS guards, the layout of the perimeter, the locations of the armories.
They were preparing for the possibility of an armed uprising, yeah? Just in case the home army outside ever manages to launch an attack or drop weapons into the camp.
But their most critical function, the real reason Pilecki was there in the first place, was to get the truth out to the free world. They needed a communication line.
And this leads to one of the most unbelievable details in this entire story. The ZOW managed to build and operate a secret radio transmitter inside Auschwitz.
I'm sorry, but how? Where do you even get the parts for a radio in a death camp?
It was an astonishing feat of scavenging and bravery. ZOW members who were assigned to work in the camp's technical workshops or storage warehouses would steal components, piece by piece.
Just sneaking them out in their pockets?
Yeah. A vacuum tube here, some copper wire there. They smuggled these parts into a secure location, in this case, a basement in the hospital block, which the SS guards tended to avoid because of the fear of typhus.
Wow. So they assemble a makeshift radio in a typhus ward. How are they powering it without blowing the fuses and alerting the camp electricians?
They carefully spliced into the camp's own electrical grid, and they had to be incredibly disciplined about their broadcast times.
Why? Because of detection.
Right. The German military had radio direction-finding trucks that patrolled the surrounding areas, specifically hunting for rogue transmissions. If they broadcasted for too long, the Germans could triangulate their exact position.
So they kept it brief.
Very brief. They would send short, encrypted bursts of Morse code, transmitting casualty numbers, troop movements, and descriptions of the atrocities, and then immediately shut the rig down and hide it.
They ran that radio for nearly 7 months in 1942, before the risk of detection grew too high and they had to dismantle it.
But the radio was really just one method. Pilecki was compiling a massive, evolving intelligence dossier in his mind.
Because he wasn't just in Auschwitz for a few months, he was there for nearly 3 years.
Right.
He watched the camp mutate.
What's fascinating here is that he was a witness to the actual evolution of the Holocaust. When he arrived in 1940, it was primarily a camp for Poles. But by late 1941 and into 1942, the demographics and the methodology of the camp shifted radically.
Auschwitz became the epicenter of the final solution, the systematic annihilation of the European Jews.
And he is documenting all of it. He documents the arrival of the massive train transports from all over Europe. He documents the selections on the ramp.
The selections were the sorting process, right?
Yes, SS doctors would stand on the platform as the bewildered, exhausted prisoners were pulled from the cattle cars. With a simple flick of a thumb or a riding crop left or right, the doctors decided who would be sent into the camp to be worked to death and who would be sent immediately to the gas chambers.
And the elderly, the pregnant women, the young children, they were almost universally sent to their deaths upon arrival.
Every single time. And Pilecki is watching this. He is memorizing the frequency of the trains, estimating the capacity of the crematoria.
And he was also there for a horrifying milestone. He documented the very first tests of Zyklon B.
He did.
Can we talk about what that was and why it was such a pivotal, terrifying shift in the camp's operation?
Well, before Zyklon B, the Nazis were primarily using mass shootings by the Einsatzgruppen, or carbon monoxide exhaust pumped into sealed vans, to murder people.
But those methods had drawbacks for them, didn't they?
Yes, they were considered too slow, too resource-intensive, and too psychologically taxing on the executioners. So in late 1941, the camp commandant, Rudolf Höss, authorized an experiment in the basement of Block 11, which was the camp's punishment bunker.
They locked roughly 600 Soviet prisoners of war and 250 sick Polish prisoners in the basement.
And they dropped in canisters of Zyklon B, which was a commercial pesticide. It consists of hydrogen cyanide absorbed into porous pellets.
God.
When exposed to air, the pellets release a lethal gas that suffocates the victims by blocking cellular respiration. He was brutally efficient. The victims died in agony within minutes.
And once the SS saw how effective it was, they scaled it up. They converted old farmhouses into gas chambers, and then they built the massive industrial crematoria complexes at Birkenau, just a short distance from the main camp.
Pilecki was observing the literal industrialization of murder. And we really have to pause and consider the psychological toll of this.
I can't even imagine.
He is carrying the burden of being a witness to a genocide. He knows his primary duty isn't to lead a suicidal charge against the guard towers to save a fraction of the people, a move that would just result in the massacre of the entire camp.
Right. If they rebelled, everyone would die.
Exactly. His agonizing duty is to stand there, watch it happen, memorize the data, and get the undeniable proof to the Allies so they can bring the full weight of their military power to stop it.
It's just an unbearable discipline to be surrounded by that level of suffering and force yourself to play the role of the objective intelligence officer.
Unimaginable restraint.
But gathering all of this data is pointless if it stays locked inside his head behind the barbed wire. The entire purpose of the mission was to sound the alarm.
Which brings us to the smuggling operations, and ultimately to one of the most profound, frustrating intelligence failures of the 20th century.
So how is he getting these detailed reports out? Because the radio was only operational for a short window, and it could only send brief messages anyway.
He relied on human couriers. In the early days of the camp, occasionally, a Polish political prisoner who had completed a specific sentence or whose family had paid a massive bribe might actually be released.
Oh, really? I didn't think anyone ever got released.
It was incredibly rare, but it did happen early on. Pilecki would instruct these men to memorize specific reports. Later, he relied on prisoners who managed to escape from work details outside the main fence.
How did they carry the information?
He would hide tightly rolled, encrypted notes inside their clothing, or they would simply carry the information in their heads to contact points in Warsaw.
So, piece by piece, this fragmented picture of hell is being assembled by the Home Army in Warsaw. By March 1941, these reports are translated, compiled, and smuggled across occupied Europe, over the mountains, through neutral territory, until they finally reach the desk of the Polish government in exile in London.
And from there, the Polish officials handed this intelligence directly to the British and American commands.
Okay, let's really look at this, because this is the moment where and I'm sure anyone listening to this deep dive, feels a boiling sense of outrage.
It's hard not to.
The Allies have the data. They have the first comprehensive corroborated record of an industrialized death camp. They have troop numbers, guard routines, the methodology of the gas chambers. And what do they do with it?
The reception in London was characterized by profound, almost paralyzing disbelief. The intelligence was met with extreme skepticism, and in many cases it was simply dismissed or filed away.
But how? I mean, how do you look at a report that says tens of thousands of people are being systematically suffocated with pesticide and just put it in a drawer? I'm trying to put myself in the shoes of a British intelligence analyst in 1941. Why wouldn't they act?
Well, it's a complex intersection of psychology, history, and military bureaucracy. Let's start with the psychology. The concept of an industrialized extermination camp was entirely unprecedented in human history.
Right.
We look back with the knowledge of the Holocaust as a historical fact. But to an intelligence clerk in London in 1941, the idea that a modern, civilized European nation had built factories explicitly designed to turn human beings into ash sounded utterly absurd.
It sounded like dark fiction.
Exactly. There was a genuine cognitive barrier to absorbing horror on that scale.
It's the propaganda of the unbelievable. If a lie is too big, people might believe it. But if a truth is too horrifying, people will reject it just to protect their own sanity.
And that psychological barrier was reinforced by historical precedent. You have to remember the hangover from the First World War.
The propaganda from WWI.
Yes. During WWI, the British public had been bombarded with horrific stories of German atrocities and Belgium stories of soldiers bayoneting babies and operating corpse factories to make soap.
Oh, and those weren't true.
After the war, almost all of those stories were exposed as completely fabricated. Allied propaganda designed to drum up recruitment.
So the intelligence community in WWII had this cynical reflex. They felt they had been played before.
Right. When they read Pilecki's reports, many British officials assumed the Polish underground was doing the exact same thing.
They thought it was exaggerated.
They assumed the Poles were taking the reality of a harsh concentration camp and exaggerating the suffering by a factor of 10, fabricating the gas chambers to emotionally manipulate the Allies into dropping everything and launching an immediate military rescue.
They applied standard bureaucratic skepticism to a situation that was completely outside the bounds of human experience. But it wasn't just disbelief, was it? The Poles were actively begging for military intervention. What were they actually asking the Allies to do?
The Home Army and the government in exile were practically pleading. They proposed a few options. One was a coordinated assault. The Home Army would attack the camp from the outside, while Pilecki's ZOW network would stage an armed uprising from within.
That sounds plausible.
But the Home Army Command eventually ruled this out as suicidal. They simply didn't have the heavy weapons to breach the SS garrisons, and they knew any failed attempt would result in the retaliatory slaughter of every prisoner in the camp.
So if a ground assault is impossible, what about the air? They asked the Allies to bomb the railway lines leading into Auschwitz, right? Stop the trains, stop the machinery.
Yes, they requested targeted bombing of the rail lines and even the crematoria themselves. But the Allied High Command rejected the requests based on tactical and logistical arguments.
Why?
Auschwitz was in southern Poland, which was at the extreme limit of the combat radius for Allied bombers flying from Britain at the time. A bombing raid would require flying without fighter escorts deep into heavily defended enemy airspace.
And diverting planes from other missions?
Right. Diverting heavy bombers from what the Allies considered strategic targets. German munitions factories, oil refineries, submarine pens.
They were prioritizing targets that degraded the German war machine.
Their overriding military logic was this: the fastest and most effective way to save the prisoners of Auschwitz is to win the war as quickly as possible. Diverting resources to bomb train tracks, which the Germans could repair in 48 hours with slave labor, was seen as a waste of strategic assets.
Unbelievable.
Furthermore, precision bombing in WWII was an oxymoron. If you tried to bomb the crematoria, you were almost guaranteed to drop high explosives on the wooden barracks, massacring the very prisoners you were trying to save.
But that logic is fundamentally flawed. Win the war to save the prisoners only works if the prisoners are just sitting in cells waiting for liberation.
Exactly.
Pilecki's reports explicitly stated that the camp was operating on a timeline of total annihilation. By the time the Allied tanks rolled into Poland, the people in those barracks would be smoke.
And that is the tragic core of the intelligence failure. The Allies failed to recognize that the Holocaust was an entirely separate war being waged concurrently with the military conflict.
It's just devastating.
And historians still fiercely debate this today, honestly. Beyond the logistical arguments and the cognitive dissonance, many argue there was an undeniable underlying level of indifference to the specific fate of the European Jews. It wasn't a priority.
So cut back to Auschwitz. Pilecki is sitting in the center of hell. He has spent over 2.5 years risking his life every single day to gather this data.
Yeah.
He knows his reports are getting out. He is waiting for the roar of Allied bombers, waiting for the parachute drops of weapons. And nothing happens. The sky is empty.
It's just silence from the outside.
The trains just keep rolling in day after day. He realizes that the truth he is bleeding for is just being filed away in a cabinet in London.
He realizes the limitation of the written word. A piece of paper can be ignored. A smuggled note can be dismissed as a hysterical exaggeration. He concludes that the only way to shatter the disbelief of the Allied command is to stand in front of them and argue the case in person. If he wants the camp destroyed, he has to escape and convince the world himself.
The audacity of this man. I mean, he successfully broke into the most heavily guarded death camp on the planet, survived for 3 years, built an army, and now he decides he's just going to break out.
It's incredible.
How does he even do it? Because you don't just dig a tunnel under the wire.
He waited for the right opportunity, and it required immense patience and nerve. By early 1943, the Gestapo had started heavily investigating the resistance networks within the camp.
They were getting close to him.
ZOW members were being arrested and executed. Pilecki knew the net was closing in on him. He managed to use his network connections to get himself and 2 trusted friends assigned to a very specific work detail: the bakery.
Why the bakery?
Because the bakery was located in a building just outside the heavily fortified perimeter of the main camp. They still marched under heavy armed guard to get there, and they were locked inside during their shift, but they were beyond the high-voltage electrified fences.
Okay, so they're outside the main wire, but they're locked in a building with SS guards right outside.
Right. On the night of April 26 to 27, 1943, they minted their move. Over several weeks, they had managed to secretly duplicate a key to one of the bakery's heavy iron doors.
Oh, wow.
They had also procured civilian clothes from the camp's sorting warehouses and smuggled out some tobacco.
Tobacco. What's the tobacco for?
To throw off the tracking dogs.
Oh, of course.
When the guards were briefly distracted by the noise of the baking machinery, Pilecki and his 2 companions forced the heavy door open, overpowered a guard who tried to stop them, and bolted into the darkness.
And they used the tobacco then?
Yeah, as they ran, they scattered the tobacco behind them to ruin the scent trail for the SS dogs they knew would be released within minutes.
And then what? They're in the middle of occupied Poland, in striped camp uniforms or whatever civilian scraps they managed to put on.
They moved entirely by night, avoiding roads, wading through freezing rivers to cover their tracks. They walked roughly 100 kilometers on foot, surviving on sheer adrenaline and whatever scraps they could forage, until they finally made contact with the local units of the Home Army.
It is an almost unbelievable feat of endurance. I mean, he survived the initial beating in Warsaw, nearly 3 years of starvation and disease in Auschwitz, and then executed a flawless 100-kilometer evasion through enemy territory.
It's superhuman.
And the first thing he does when he makes it to his safe house isn't to collapse or ask to go home.
No. He immediately sits down and begins drafting a massive, comprehensive report, the culminating document of his mission. He wants to take it straight to the top.
Right.
He meets with the high command of the Home Army, and he pleads, in person, for an assault on the camp.
And what do they say?
They tell him exactly what London had concluded. An assault is suicidal. The Home Army is too weak, the German garrison is too strong, and the risk of a mass slaughter of the prisoners is too high. The Allies are not coming.
I can't even imagine the devastation of that moment. He risked absolutely everything. He gave up 3 years of his life to hell. He handed them the undeniable, documented, living truth, and the gears of the world just kept turning in the other direction.
It is the bitter ache of his story. We spent time unpacking why the Allies failed to act. The psychology, the WWI propaganda hangover, the logistical limitations. But we must be very clear. Understanding why they failed does not absolve them of the failure.
Right.
The intelligence was accurate, the witness was unimpeachable, the failure rested entirely on the shoulders of the free world that refused to look the truth in the eye.
It makes you wonder how we process information today. If a piece of data completely shatters our comfortable worldview, do we actually engage with it, or do we subconsciously categorize it as an exaggeration so we don't have to deal with the moral implications of acting on it?
It's a heavy question.
Pilecki escaped to force the world to act. But his return to the outside world would only lead him into another, entirely different kind of meat grinder.
This is where the narrative shifts from a tragedy of inaction to a tragedy of active, malicious erasure. The war eventually ended, but Pilecki's fight did not.
Let's follow the timeline into the second destruction. Pilecki doesn't quietly retire to a farm after his escape. He stays in the fight.
Right.
In August 1944, he fights in the Warsaw Uprising. This was a massive, bloody, 2-month-long rebellion by the Polish Home Army aimed at liberating the capital from the Germans before the advancing Soviet army arrived.
It was a desperate, heroic battle, but it was doomed. The Home Army fought house to house, but the Soviet army under Stalin deliberately halted their advance just across the Vistula River.
He just stopped.
Stalin simply sat back and watched as the German military systematically leveled Warsaw and crushed the Polish resistance. It was politically convenient for the Soviets to let the Nazis destroy the pro-Western, independent Polish fighters.
Yeah. When the uprising is crushed, Pilecki is captured once again by the Germans. He spends the final months of the war in German POW camps in Bavaria. Finally, in May 1945, the war in Europe ends.
The camp is liberated by American troops.
Right. He is free. He goes to Italy, where the Polish armed forces in the West are stationed. He is safe.
But for Poland, the end of World War II was not a liberation. It was a change of management.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
The German occupation was replaced by Soviet domination. A new, puppet communist regime, backed by Moscow and the Red Army, was installed in Warsaw.
And Pilecki, who was deeply loyal to the legitimate Polish government in exile in London, views this new Soviet-backed regime as an illegal occupation force.
Yes.
So what does he do? He could have stayed in Italy, he could have gone to London, he could have started a new life in America, he had earned it 1,000 times over.
But that was not in his nature. He is, at his core, a man who bears witness against totalitarianism. He documented the fascist atrocities at Auschwitz, and now he looks at post-war Poland and sees the Stalinist machinery taking hold.
The secret arrests, the suppression of democracy.
The murder of opposition figures.
Yeah.
In October 1945, under a false identity, he voluntarily returns to Poland.
He goes back into the fire.
He joins the anti-communist underground, part of what history now refers to as the Cursed Soldiers. His mission is exactly the same as it was in Auschwitz. Gather intelligence on the atrocities of the new regime and smuggle the truth out to the West.
But the new regime's internal security apparatus, the Ministry of Public Security known as the UB, is ruthless.
Very ruthless.
They are trained by the Soviet NKVD. They are methodically hunting down the old heroes of the Home Army. Eventually, his cover is blown.
He is warned. His superiors in the underground tell him he has been compromised and order him to escape to the West. But he refuses to leave his post until a replacement can be found.
Oh, wow.
On May 8, 1947, the secret police kick down his door and arrest him.
And this is where the profound, sickening irony of his life crystallizes. He is taken to the Mokotów prison in Warsaw. The interrogation that follows is so unimaginably brutal that we have to just pause and absorb it.
It's horrific.
He is tortured for months. His fingernails are pulled out, his collarbones are broken. During a brief visit with his wife, he whispered to her that Auschwitz was a trifle compared to what they were doing to him. He reportedly said the Gestapo had been gentle by comparison.
Let that statement sink in. A man who survived nearly 3 years in the absolute epicenter of the Holocaust, who was beaten by the SS, found the brutality of his own countrymen operating under a Soviet-imposed communist state to be worse.
It is a chilling indictment.
The UB wasn't just trying to extract information, they were trying to break him morally. They needed him to confess to being a foreign spy, an imperialist provocateur.
But why go to such lengths? Why was a 46-year-old cavalry officer such an existential threat to the communist state?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it's because totalitarian regimes cannot tolerate objective truth. They require an absolute monopoly on reality. The communist government was trying to sell the narrative that they were the true liberators and protectors of Poland. Pilecki's very existence challenged that lie. He was a living symbol of the independent democratic Polish state.
He was a genuine war hero whose moral authority vastly overshadowed the puppet government.
Exactly. They couldn't just execute him. They had to discredit him entirely. They had to destroy what he represented.
Which leads to the show trial in March 1948, a trial where the script was already written before he even stepped into the courtroom.
It was a theater of the absurd. He was charged with espionage, illegal border crossing, and planning assassinations, charges he vehemently denied, though he proudly admitted to gathering intelligence for the legitimate Polish government.
Despite the torture, he never broke on the stand. He maintained his dignity.
But the verdict was predetermined. He was officially branded a traitor to the state. He received a death sentence.
And on the evening of May 25th, 1948, Witold Pilecki, the man who voluntarily walked into Auschwitz to save humanity, was led into the basement of Mokotów prison. He was executed with a single shot to the back of the head. His last reported words were, "Long live free Poland."
It is a devastating, infuriating end. But the communist regime wasn't finished with him. Physical execution wasn't enough to secure their monopoly on the truth. They had to execute his memory.
The historical erasure. This is the part that truly terrifies me about how easily history can be manipulated. Under the communist regime, his body was thrown into a mass grave. To this day, his exact burial place remains unknown.
His name was scrubbed entirely from the history books. You could not speak his name in public. If a historian tried to research him, they would be arrested. Historical erasure is the ultimate tool of state control. If a regime can control the past, it controls the present and dictates the future.
By erasing Pilecki, they were attempting to enforce a collective amnesia on the entire nation. They were deleting the memory of the independent Polish resistance. And the cruelty extended to his family. His wife and 2 children were ostracized. They were marked as the family of a traitor.
His children were barred from pursuing higher education.
They had to live every single day, knowing the incomprehensible bravery of their father. Yet they were forced to live in a society that officially mandated he was a villain.
It requires an entirely different kind of endurance from a family. The endurance of carrying a truth in total silence, waiting for a regime to fall.
And that forced silence lasted for over 4 decades. It wasn't until the Berlin Wall fell, until the collapse of the Soviet bloc and the end of communism in Poland in 1989, that the truth could finally be spoken out loud. 40 years of darkness.
Incredible.
In 1990, the democratic Polish state formally exonerated him. They acknowledged that his trial was a sham, his conviction was illegal, and his execution was a state-sponsored murder.
This is what we mean when we say Witold Pilecki was killed twice.
Yeah.
First, he was destroyed spiritually by a free world that refused to believe his undeniable truth in 1943. Then, he was destroyed physically and historically by a totalitarian country that murdered him in 1948 to enforce a lie.
Today, thankfully, his heroism is recognized globally. He has been posthumously awarded Poland's highest decorations. There are monuments to him. And May 25th, the day he was executed with a shot to the back of the head, is now marked across Europe as the International Day of Heroes of the Fight Against Totalitarianism.
Which is a necessary redemption. It is important that his name is restored.
Yeah.
But we have to be incredibly careful not to let that posthumous honor act as a comforting blanket for our own consciences.
Right.
We celebrate him now because it is easy. It is safe to build a statue 80 years later.
Right.
But the real test of humanity wasn't what we did in the 1990s. The test was in 1941 and 1943, when the truth was deeply inconvenient, when it demanded impossible, immediate military action. And in that moment, when it actually mattered, the world failed him.
That is the heavy, lingering lesson of this deep dive. It is a lesson about what it actually costs to carry an unbearable truth to a world that would rather look away. The least we owe him, and the least we owe the millions of victims whose final moments he meticulously recorded while standing in the center of hell, is to make sure his name is never forgotten again. Witold Pilecki.
And we owe it to ourselves to aggressively examine our own relationship with uncomfortable truths. We like to tell ourselves that if we are ever presented with absolute, documented, irrefutable proof of an atrocity, humanity will automatically unite to stop it.
We want to believe that data automatically leads to moral action.
We do. But Pilecki's story forces us to look in the mirror and ask a much darker question. When a truth is simply too terrible to comprehend, do we genuinely demand proof, or do we just use the demand for proof as a convenient excuse to do absolutely nothing?